Hello everyone. This is my second video lecture on Chapter 7 on cognition and thinking and intelligence. In this video, I'm just going to talk about language, and the book talks a lot about morphemes and phenoms and different components of language, and I'm not really going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about how language allows us to be able to think and how our language ability is very different from like an animal's ability to use language. So I won't be quizzing you on morphemes and phenoms. I'll make sure that those questions are not in the quiz for you because I don't know that that's what's really important. There are psychologists that study language. There are people called linguists that actually study language and language development. But what's really important to us in psychology is really understanding how do we use language to communicate information and how our language ability is so much more sophisticated than animals, and how we can use that ability to really communicate ideas and really make a difference, I guess, in the world. So language is really important to our ability to think. Most of our thought processes are actually using language. We have mental images, we have concepts, but much of those concepts have to do with language. And then when we're thinking about things, we're thinking out loud. We're thinking in words and we're thinking in language. So language is a really important component to our thought process and our ability to think. Sharing ideas with other people, we have to be able to describe that and share that information with them. We can't share our mental images with people, but we can share our thoughts. We can share our language with them. We can share our memories with them and our ideas with them. And so that's a really uniquely human ability. The average person uses 30 to 60,000 words, so it's amazing. When we talk about development, I don't know that we'll talk about language development too much. It's a really complex thing, and it's quite amazing that you take a helpless infant and in 2 years they're starting to use words, and a little bit later they're putting sentences together, and then they're carrying on conversations, and then their ability to use language gets more and more complex. So there's a debate in psychology, or there has been a debate about how language does develop. Noam Chomsky is a very famous linguist, so he studies language, and he says we're biologically pre-wired to learn language. He says that we have neurons, we have networks of neurons that are just sitting there waiting to be activated when we're born, and that those neurons are activated by language, and that's how we are able to learn so quickly. I mean, there's a huge explosion of language development, probably between 0 to 2 and 0 to 3 for sure. B.F. Skinner was the famous behaviorist that we learn about in the learning chapter, and he thought we learned language just because we were reinforced for learning language. So if a child asks for a drink and they get that drink, they're reinforced for that. But I think that might be a partial component to learning language, but it certainly doesn't explain the complexity of language. We do also know that there's a critical period for language development. There's been some pretty horrific cases of abuse where children have been found at 8, 10 years old, and never actually interacted with, never actually spoken to, minimally cared for, and they actually weren't able to learn language. The book talks about the Jeannie Wiley case. We're going to cover that case in the chapter 9 on development because it affected many aspects of her development, not just her language development. Language, it has to be heard. So a child has to be exposed to language before age 5, or they will not be able to learn language. So they have to make those neurological connections before age 5, kind of like when we talked about hearing and the cochlear implants. If you don't make those connections at a young age, when you're supposed to make those connections just go away, and you can't make those connections later on. So it's really important for children to be exposed to language at a really young age. So what about animals? So why can't animals learn language? There has been a huge amount of research with chimpanzees and attempts to teach them sign language, lexigrams in order to communicate. One of the reasons why chimpanzees can't speak like we do is they don't have the muscles and the tongue movement and stuff that we have in order to make the same sounds that we can make. They certainly can make sounds and things, but their ability to actually speak and use language in a spoken format is not, it's just not physically possible for them. But what about sign language? Their hands are very similar to ours. There's a lot about us that's very similar to chimpanzees. So there has been a lot of research with chimpanzees about their ability to use language, their ability to communicate. And there's been a lot of studies in the past, I think, to kind of sort of prove humans superiority over animals, which I'm not sure what the necessity of that was for. But animals really do communicate, but their language ability is limited. So language is really considered a uniquely human ability. Animals absolutely communicate. You can tell these two little chimpanzees are communicating and sharing, and they're not talking, but they're certainly communicating. But this ability to have abstract thinking, to think about ideas or things that aren't there, what these little chimpanzees are doing is concrete. They're talking about, or they're communicating about something that's right there in front of them. Where we can talk about possibilities, we can think about things that might happen in the future, we can talk about ideas that we have, and that all comes from our language ability. Animals definitely communicate with each other. They have different cries, different sounds that they make. There has been lots of research where they've recorded different sounds and what the meaning of those different sounds are. Sometimes the sound means, hey, there's some food over here. Sometimes the sound means there's danger over here. Run, whatever it is. So animals do communicate, but it's at a different level than we communicate as human beings. So animals can learn sign language. Sarah the chimpanzee learned a couple hundred different sign language symbols and definitely knew what she was saying and doing with that sign language. So the animals can definitely learn words and symbols and sign language even, but they don't really understand how to have a conversation. They're not able to put it together and make it into a sentence. So their abilities for language are similar to like a 2-year-old toddler that's just learning to speak. They can pick out words, they can say words, they understand drink and milk and those kind of things. We're talking chimpanzees. They know what those words are associated with, but they can't put a sentence together and or have a conversation about something. So animals are definitely capable of communication, but they still can't use language in the same way that we can. Chimpanzees are our closest relatives, so they're the most like us, and they have been studied, and they've been studied, and there's been attempts to teach chimpanzees language since the 1930s. I'm going to talk a little bit about Kanzi the chimpanzee, and I'll put in a video of him. I don't know if I think I have 2 videos I might put in of him because it's really amazing what he does understand. There's a video where the lady's wearing like a welding helmet. It looks really weird. And she's asking him to do all these things. And the reason why she has that welding helmet on is to conceal her face so that he's not reading her facial expressions, that he's really understanding what she's saying to him. And so it's pretty amazing that he can actually understand that. But it's still different than having a conversation. So Kanzi the chimpanzee he's aged 41 today. He was born in 1980. And he actually started going to language training with his mom. They were trying to teach his mom to use this really complex lexigram. So it's kind of like a smart screen on a computer where different buttons and different symbols meant different things, like a banana and other things. And they were trying to teach his mother how to use this, and she just brought him along. And it turns out that he was highly intelligent. They feel like he might have been maybe the alpha male of the bunch had he been not in captivity. He was very intelligent, and he just started actually spontaneously using this lexigram to communicate while they were trying to teach it to his mom. So at a very young age, he started learning to use this lexigram and really learning some language things. And his case really challenges the assumptions about the intellectual abilities of animals, because animals absolutely have intelligence. They do have the ability to learn, to use tools, and many things that we used to think that they didn't have the ability to do. And they've learned many aspects of language, but still they are unable to have the same language ability that we do as human beings. That as human beings, we can carry on conversations and really learn things that really communicate at a whole different level than chimpanzees can. So this is chimpanzee, and this is what I was talking about when we're talking about uh, lexigrams here. So this is Kanzi, the chimpanzee, and he was trained to use this lexigram. And I think they have 3 different pages. This is showing all 3 different pages. But in the video, you'll see he's just using one big page of lexigram, and then they switch it to a separate page, and he actually has memorized where each of these buttons are on the screen, and he knows what each of these buttons mean. So pretty amazing. And he was also able to understand 500 sentences that were spoken to him. So in the video where she's wearing that welding helmet, he clearly understands what she's asking him to do, and sometimes he wants to do it, sometimes he doesn't. But it's amazing what he does know and how intelligent he is. So, we have worked with animals, with chimpanzees, and tried to teach them language since the 1930s, so almost 100 years now. It's kind of hard to even imagine. But the problem is that they just do not have that language ability. They don't have those networks of neurons that we do, that are just waiting to be activated and to learn language. Noam Chomsky, that I talked about before, who said that we're pre-wired to learn language, believes that if chimpanzees were able to use language like we do, they would already be talking to us. And so even with all the interventions and all the training that we've done with different chimpanzees, they're still not able to get to the same language ability that we have. So we do know that language is a uniquely human ability, and it's an amazing ability that we have. And the one thing that's good about animals not being able to communicate with us is there won't be the Planet of the Apes. We're still safe. So that's it on language.